Hello, friends. In these uncertain times that we're living in, I find myself relying more and more on watercolor for happiness in my life. And today I picked up a set from Prima called the Art Philosophy Watercolor Confections Terrain Set. I've owned a couple other Prima sets and I've been impressed with the quality compared to other student grade brands. The fact that all of their palettes come in these classic metal tins is a huge selling point for me. I can't stand plastic watercolor containers. I've also ordered tins on their own specifically that weren't as nice as the Prima tins or that weren't as well put together, so that's a big factor in their favor. But of course, with all watercolor, it's really what's inside the tin that counts. And Prima has started doing something that really sets them apart from other student grade brands. They are now including pigment information for all of their colors, which if you are a budding pigment nerd the way I am, that is big news and very exciting. Of course, most of the colors are hues made up of multiple pigments. There is, however, one single pigment paint in this set. The terrain set is made up of 6 greens, 3 muted primaries, and then 3 wildcard colors that really grew on me over the course of filming this demo. Obviously, it's marketed as a palette for painting landscapes and other outdoor scenes, but there are a couple omissions that sort of get in the way of that, and we'll talk about that more later. Each half pan is printed with the number of the color, so you always know which one you're looking at. The half pans don't have the names of the colors or the pigment information on them, so you have to reference that number with the swatch card. I used to own the Pastel Dreams watercolor set and the Odyssey watercolor set, also by Prima, and I gotta tell you that playing with this set made me want to pick those up again. Prima blends together some beautiful hues. These are highly pigmented paints and they're really fun to play with. I even took a watercolor portrait course once where the instructor just used the Pastel Dreams set, so these are actually really versatile in and of themselves, even if you only have one set. First green in this kit is called Fern. It's color number 121 and it's made up of pigments PB27 and PY14. I expect there's also white in a lot of these mixes, although it's not listed in the pigment information. Fern has a light fastness rating of 3 stars. Second is Spanish Moss, which is slightly more muted and slightly warmer than Fern and otherwise almost indistinguishable. It's made up of PY14 and PB29 and its light fastness rating is 2 stars. Spanish Moss, coincidentally, is the title of this song that's playing in the background right now that I wrote. Also, this is my one quibble with the names. I don't think that this is an accurate Spanish moss color. I'm just saying, when I was in Savannah last year, I went to one of their 2 very large, very well-equipped art supply stores, and I bought a tube of rare green earth because that perfectly matched the Spanish moss that I wanted to paint. And now I am way behind on my swatches. The third green is color number 123. It's called Vine Leaf, and it is made of PB27 and PY14 and PR101. Light fastness of 1 star. Fourth is number 124, Early Spring, which is a very minty green. It's made up of PY3 and PB27 and PB15:3. Light fastness rating is 2 stars. Second row middle is number 125, Balsam. Pigments are PB27 and PB15:3 and PY14. You may notice a trend with some of these pigments. Light fastness rating is 3 stars. Finally, in the greens list is one that is so pale it's almost non-existent. Number 126 is Willow Tree, made of pigments PY3 and PB29. Light fastness 3 stars, although I don't know that I would ever notice if it faded. It's so pale. Catching up to the second half, we have Blue Shadow, which is a mix of PB27 and PB15:3, a transparent granulating blue that reaches some very dark values. 128 is Sourwood. This is our single pigment. It's PR170, a good primary red. Light fastness of 3 stars, the same as 127. Next is 129 Crabapple, made of PR101, PY42, and PB29 with a light fastness of 3 stars. And again, there must be some white in here. It's almost like a gouache in its opacity and its lightness. Number 130 is called Maple. It's made of PY14, PR170, and PR101, a beautiful orange with a light fastness of 3 stars. Number 131 is poetically called Purple Smoke Tree. Pigments are PV23, PR57:1, and PR170, light fastness 3 stars. Finally, there's the closest thing we have to a primary yellow, which is more of an ochre or an earth yellow. It's called Sassafras, number 132. Pigments PY14, PR101, and PB27, light fastness 3 stars. I wanted to pull out the 3 primaries from the second half of this set and see how they match up in a color chart. With all of these swatches and mix samples, I'm working almost in mass tone because these paints are so highly pigmented, so keep that in mind. You'll see these blues get down to some incredibly dark values when I start mixing up the purples. I found this to be a very muted primary set, but still really versatile, especially when it comes to the warm colors. These oranges and reds mixed up very nicely. Just keep in mind that because almost all of these colors are hues made of multiple pigments, the propensity to get mud when you try to mix them together is a little bit higher. Still, overall, I was really impressed with the versatility of just these 3 paints. Those 6 greens that we saw at first don't have the full range of values, so when you need a really deep dark green, you can come back to these primaries and mix one up yourself. In order to take advantage of so many different variations on green, I made a little drawing that is inspired by Tolkien's illustrations for The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I was going for a lot of rolling hills, contour lines, and running water. I'm also working with more diluted paint than I usually work with. This is sort of a tea consistency. My paper is Strathmore 200 watercolor paper, which is my favorite cold press and my favorite pulpy paper. Let's get into the limitations of this palette. They called it the terrain palette, but they didn't include any gray or brown. For me, that's a little limiting, but I'm doing my best to work around it. Most of these colors don't neutralize with each other very well, and I ended up making a mix of balsam and purple smoke tree in order to get a kind of muddy, light valued gray for my distant mountains and cliffs. Otherwise, for almost the whole painting, I'm using these paints straight without mixing them. And of course I can do that because this is a very harmoniously arranged palette. Most of the greens, as well as the orange and the yellow, have PY14 in them for a pigment, which means that they look like they belong next to each other. They have that common yellow pigment and they sit very nicely beside each other. By the same token, even though I didn't take advantage of it in this painting, Sourwood, Maple, and Purple Smoke Tree all have PR170 in them, which means they'll act the same way. It's almost like if you're using adjacent colors on the color wheel. The eye notices that they have the same pigment in them, and they look really good together. This is just one way that knowing your pigments empowers you as a painter to make certain decisions in your artwork that can lead to more interesting effects. in the background ended up looking a little bit like a sofa from the 70s with this wild pattern on it, and I'm not gonna lie, I kind of love it and I want to paint more like that. Overall, my first impressions of this palette are extremely positive. It's missing a good dark green, and it's missing a solid gray and a solid brown, but it makes up for that with a great selection of muted primaries. And with those on your side, you can really paint any landscape in the real world or a fantasy world. Lately, I've just been craving bright, playful colors in my watercolors, and this set delivers. I had a great time making this painting, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Thanks so much for watching.